I never imagined that renting out my basement would lead me down a path of fear and distrust. But here I am, caught in the silent storm that started with a knock on my door. My name is Sarah, and I live alone in this old Victorian house that has been in my family for decades. The basement had been empty for months, dark and cold, and I decided it was time to rent it out. Money was tight, and having someone reliable seemed like the perfect solution. The day he arrived, I was waiting anxiously by the door. The man who stood there was younger than I expected, probably in his late 20s. He wore simple clothes, a plain jacket and jeans, and his dark hair was neatly combed. His eyes, though, held a strange quietness, like he was carefully measuring everything around him. "Good evening, ma'am," he said softly, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Nathan. I'm here about the basement." I smiled, feeling a flicker of relief. "Please, come in." I led him downstairs. The basement was nothing fancy. Cold stone walls, a small window near the ceiling that let in a sliver of fading daylight, and a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I'd cleaned it up as best as I could, but the musty smell lingered. Nathan looked around silently, nodding occasionally, as if approving what he saw. He didn't ask many questions, just the essentials about rent, utilities, and house rules. When I told him I expected quiet and timely payments, he smiled that same unreadable smile. "You'll have no trouble from me," he said. The paperwork was straightforward. He paid his deposit right away and promised to move in the next day. I shook his hand, trying to hide my nervousness. There was something about him that made me uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on what. For the first few days, Nathan was exactly what I had hoped for. Quiet, polite. He never made noise, never came upstairs except to greet me briefly or to collect mail. I barely saw him in daylight hours. Mostly, he was gone or keeping to himself in the basement. I started to feel comfortable with his presence. I told myself that my instincts were just being paranoid. After all, he paid rent on time, kept the place clean, and caused no problems. Then, the noises began. It was around midnight when I first heard it. A faint scraping sound, like something being dragged slowly across the basement floor. I froze in bed, straining to listen. It stopped as suddenly as it started. Maybe the wind. I tried to convince myself, but the next night it came again. A low thud, followed by soft murmurs, like whispered conversations in a language I couldn't understand. I told myself I was imagining things, but the unease settled deeper in my chest. One evening, the new tenant upstairs, a young woman named Emily, knocked on my door, her face pale. "Sarah, do you hear those noises too, late at night?" she asked, voice trembling. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I do." Emily said she thought it was coming from the basement. Strange sounds, whispers, sometimes even crying. I promised her I'd look into it. But how do you investigate silence? The next day I found myself staring at the basement door longer than I ever had before. The familiar wooden panel, worn from years of use, suddenly seemed heavier, like it was guarding something I wasn't meant to see. I took a deep breath and went downstairs. The air was cooler than usual, and the faint scent of dampness lingered in the corners. Nathan's belongings were sparse. A small bed against the far wall, a neat stack of books on a rickety shelf, and a desk with a single lamp. Everything was impeccably clean, almost sterile. I ran my fingers over the books. Some were novels, but others were about psychology, human behavior, and manipulation. A shiver ran down my spine. Did Nathan really just want a quiet place to live? Or was there more behind those polite eyes? The noises from last night echoed in my mind. I wasn't sure if I was prepared to confront whatever was hidden down here, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. That evening, I went to talk to Emily again. Her face looked drawn and tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "I don't know what it is," she whispered, "but it feels wrong. Like someone is watching us, even when we're alone." I wanted to comfort her, but the truth was, I felt the same way. There was a weight in the house, an invisible presence that made every shadow deeper, every silence louder. Days passed, and the noises grew more frequent. Sometimes I heard scratching, other times soft footsteps pacing the basement floor. I tried to speak to Nathan directly, but he was always calm, collected, and polite. His voice never rose, and his eyes never betrayed a hint of emotion. One night, curiosity overcame my fear. I crept down to the basement with a flashlight, determined to catch the source of the sounds. The beam danced along the walls, illuminating the cold bricks and the dusty floor. As I scanned the room, my light caught on something odd, a seam in the wall behind Nathan's bed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but definitely there. My heart hammered. Was there a hidden door? I pressed my hand against the wall. It was solid, but the seam was sharp and clear. I looked around for a handle, a latch, anything. My fingers found a small indentation near the floor. With effort, I pushed, and to my surprise, the wall gave way, revealing a narrow passage leading into darkness. I swallowed hard, fear mixing with adrenaline. What had Nathan been hiding? What horrors lay beyond this secret door? I didn't know then that opening this door would unravel a nightmare I was never prepared for. The air in the narrow passage was thick and stale, smelling of dust and neglect. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but I could make out the outlines of a small room at the end. Every step I took echoed, the sound bouncing off the stone walls and settling like a weight on my chest. I wanted to turn back, but something deeper than fear pushed me forward, a desperate need to know the truth. When I finally reached the room, the door creaked open to reveal a chilling sight. The walls were covered in crude drawings and scribbled notes, frantic handwriting, filled with words I could barely understand, but felt in my bones. In the center of the room lay an old, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and stained. I picked it up with trembling hands, the weight of it heavy, as if carrying the secrets of 1,000 nightmares. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was Nathan's. His confessions, his thoughts, and his twisted plans spilled out in ink. A window into a mind that was anything but quiet. He wrote about patience, about watching his victims slowly unravel. He didn't kill them quickly. No, he preferred to break them piece by piece, mentally, emotionally, until they were nothing but hollow shells. The diary detailed his methods, subtle manipulations, gaslighting, isolation. Each entry was colder, darker, more disturbing than the last. I felt sick, my hands shaking as I closed the book. How had I missed this? How had I let someone so dangerous into my home? Suddenly, a noise behind me made me spin around. The basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging me into darkness. Sarah, a calm, cold voice, whispered from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here." My heart raced, terror gripping me like ice. Nathan was no longer just a tenant. He was a predator, and I was his next prey. I swallowed hard, the air thick in my throat. The darkness felt alive, pressing in from all sides. Nathan's voice was calm, chillingly composed, like a predator savoring its next move. "I told you I'd cause no trouble," he said softly, stepping from the shadows. His eyes gleamed, sharp and unreadable, like black mirrors reflecting something I didn't want to see. My legs wanted to run, but I was frozen, caught between terror and disbelief. How could the man I'd trusted hide this darkness inside him? He smiled again, the same small, unsettling smile from the day he arrived, and said, "The trouble finds those who listen too closely." I backed away slowly, clutching the diary to my chest like a shield. My mind raced, trying to think of an escape. Was there a way out of this basement prison? Nathan's steps were deliberate, slow, methodical. He circled me like a shark, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've studied people like you," he whispered. "Your fears, your weaknesses. It's fascinating how easily minds can be unraveled." A shiver ran down my spine as I realized. He wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator, a psychological tormentor who thrived on breaking souls before bodies. "I could make you doubt everything you know," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Your sanity, your memories, even your own reflection." Tears pricked my eyes, not just from fear, but from the sickening realization that I was already part of his game. But something inside me refused to surrender. I steadied my breathing, meeting his gaze with as much defiance as I could muster. "You won't win," I said, voice trembling but firm. "Someone will find out. You won't get away with this." Nathan's smile widened, dark and victorious. "That's where you're wrong, Sarah. This house, this basement, it's my domain. And soon, you'll see that silence is the loudest scream." The lights flickered, casting twisted shadows on the walls. I knew then that the nightmare was only beginning and that escaping Nathan's silent torment would take more strength than I ever imagined. The basement door creaked open suddenly, breaking the suffocating silence. I stumbled back, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Nathan's figure slipped into the dim light, calm as ever, but his presence filled the room like a shadow I couldn't shake. I clutched the diary tighter, flipping through its pages frantically, searching for anything that could help me understand, or maybe save me. His chilling confessions, detailed manipulation tactics I never thought possible, how he'd isolate his victims from reality, distort their perception, and leave them broken before the end. A surge of anger burned through me. I refused to be just another name in his twisted ledger. "Why?" I whispered, voice cracking. "Why do this to people?" Nathan's smile was thin, almost sad. "Because it's the only way I feel alive. Watching a mind unravel is far more beautiful than a quick death." The weight of his words pressed down on me, but I forced myself to stand tall. I needed a plan. I couldn't trust him, but I also couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Suddenly, I remembered the old phone in the hallway, disconnected but still functional for emergencies. I had to get there, somehow. "Let me go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please." Nathan tilted his head, studying me. "You don't understand, Sarah. This isn't about you. It's about control. And once you lose it, well, that's when the real silence begins." My mind raced. How long had he been playing this game? How many before me? With a sudden burst of courage, I bolted past him, toward the stairs. His footsteps echoed behind me, slower but deliberate, reaching the hallway. I grabbed the phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The line was dead. Panic surged. But I forced myself to think. The diary mentioned a secret room, maybe a way out. I had to find it. I had to survive. I barely had time to catch my breath before Nathan's voice echoed behind me again, calm but deadly. "You think you can escape? You're already mine." The basement stairs felt endless as I sprinted toward the hidden door I had discovered. Days ago, my hands fumbled at the seam, fingers raw and trembling, but finally, the wall shifted open just enough for me to slip inside. The secret room was small and claustrophobic, but it was the only refuge I had. The stale air burned my lungs as I crouched in the shadows, clutching the diary against my chest like a talisman. Outside, I heard Nathan's slow footsteps, methodical, relentless. His silence was deafening, a predator stalking its prey. Minutes passed like hours. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the diary's pages, which I strained to read. Among the entries, I found something new, a map of the basement, with cryptic markings and notes. One symbol stood out, an old ventilation shaft. Near the far corner of the basement. Could that be my way out? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and this nightmare would end with me trapped forever. Slowly, I inched toward the shaft, the narrow opening barely big enough for a person to crawl through. I paused, listening. Silence with trembling hands. I removed the grate and slipped inside, the cold metal biting into my skin. The shaft was cramped, scraping against my arms and knees, but I pushed forward, desperate for freedom. Behind me, a faint sound, Nathan's voice, whispering my name, filled with dark amusement. I didn't dare look back. My only focus was moving. Forward, through the darkness, toward whatever light awaited me on the other side. The cold metal wall scraped against my skin as I crawled deeper into the ventilation shaft, every inch feeling like an eternity. The darkness was suffocating, but it was better than the looming shadow of Nathan behind me. His whispered threats echoed faintly through the narrow space, chilling me to the bone. I kept moving, my breaths shallow and ragged, trying to steady my trembling hands and legs. Every sound outside the shaft felt magnified, the creak of old floorboards, the distant drip of water, each one setting my nerves on edge. I didn't know where this shaft would lead, but anything was better than facing Nathan's cold smile again. My mind raced with memories of the diary, of his twisted words about breaking minds slowly, about the silence that followed his victims. I refused to become another lost soul in his collection. Suddenly, the shaft opened into a cramped crawl space behind the basement wall. I pushed myself out, gasping for fresh air. The room was dusty and dimly lit by a faint light from a cracked window near the ceiling. I looked around frantically for a way out, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. There, a small door, old and worn, leading up a narrow flight of stairs. I rushed toward it, my legs shaky but determined. As I climbed, the sounds of the basement faded behind me. For a moment, hope blossomed. Maybe I could escape this nightmare after all. But as I reached the top, the door creaked open to reveal a long, dark hallway, not the familiar world outside, but a shadowed corridor that stretched into the unknown. A cold breeze brushed past me, carrying a whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome back, Sarah," I froze, realization dawning. Nathan's house was bigger and darker than I had ever imagined, and the nightmare was far from over. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that cast eerie shadows on peeling wallpaper. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I moved forward, each step heavier than the last. I couldn't tell if I was walking toward salvation or deeper into a trap. The air was thick with a strange sensing, metallic mixed with decay, that made my stomach churn. I tried to steady my breathing, to quiet the storm of fear raging inside me. But the walls seemed to close in, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. As I walked, I noticed doors lining the corridor, their paint cracked and faded. Most were closed, but one at the far end was slightly ajar. A pale light spilled out, flickering as if struggling to stay alive, drawn by a mixture of dread and curiosity. I crept closer and peeked inside. The room was a nightmare frozen in time. Empty beds with rusted frames, stained sheets twisted on the floor, and walls scrawled with desperate messages, pleas for help, warnings, confessions. In the corner sat a chair, and on it a small notebook, another diary, but different from the one I found in the hidden room. This one was older, filled with frantic handwriting that spoke of terror and captivity. I reached out and opened it, my fingers trembling. The entries described a previous tenant, a woman who had vanished, without a trace. Her words told of psychological torture, of days that bled into nights without hope, of a mind slowly shattering under invisible chains. A cold chill ran down my spine. Nathan wasn't just a tenant. He was a remorseless predator who had been using this house to trap and destroy lives for years. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. The silence was suffocating. And then, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "You're next, Sarah." The slam of the door jolted me, sending a fresh wave of panic crashing through my chest. I ran to the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was old, but secure, an unyielding barrier between me and the corridor I had just escaped. I pressed, my back against the door, heart hammering, breath coming in short gasps. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. The weight of the vanished tenant's words hung over me like a suffocating shroud. I scanned the room, desperate for anything: a window, a loose board, a hidden latch. But the only thing in reach was the diary on the chair, its pages filled with madness and despair. I sat down, fingers trembling as I read entry after entry, trying to piece together the story of the woman who had disappeared. Her last words spoke of a man who didn't just kill bodies, but shattered minds, leaving victims lost in a prison of their own making. A sob escaped me. Was this my fate too? To be broken and forgotten? The flickering light above cast grotesque, shadows dancing like spectres on the walls. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it: movement. A shadow shifting, almost human, but impossible to place. "Sarah," the whisper came again, closer this time, wrapping around me like cold fingers. I stood up, backing away, clutching the diary like a lifeline. The shadow grew clearer, Nathan's silhouette emerging from the darkness, his smile a cruel slash across his face. "You can't run from me," he said softly. "Not here, not ever." I scrambled toward the window, smashing it with the diary's hardcover. Glass shattered, cold night air rushing in. Freedom was so close. But as I reached out, Nathan's hand closed over my wrist, cold and unyielding. "Let's finish what we started," he murmured, dragging me back into the darkness. Pain shot through my wrist as Nathan's grip tightened, dragging me away from the shattered window. My breath caught in my throat, panic and desperation mingling into a fierce determination to survive. I fought with every ounce of strength had left, pulling at his hand, kicking, screaming. But Nathan was relentless, calm, methodical. Like a force of nature, I couldn't stop. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice ice cold, "or you'll lose yourself faster than you think." The room spun as he dragged me back toward the basement's hidden depths. My mind raced, grasping for any chance to turn the tables, to escape the nightmare that was closing in on me. Suddenly, I remembered the diary, the secrets it held. If Nathan had been so meticulous to document his twisted games, maybe there was something I could use against him. A flash of hope ignited inside me. As Nathan paused, I twisted violently and slammed the diary into his face. He staggered, surprise flashing in his eyes for a moment. I seized the moment and darted toward the stairs, adrenaline fueling my escape. But Nathan recovered quickly. Blocking my path, we grappled, a brutal dance of desperation and control, until I managed to shove him back and sprint up the stairs, the sounds of struggle echoing behind me. Bursting into the open air, I collapsed onto the front lawn, gasping for breath. The night was still, but the terror hadn't left me. I looked back at the house my home turned prison and knew one thing: this was far from over. The silence that had settled in the house was deafening, but I was determined to break it, to expose Nathan's darkness before anyone else fell victim to the silent tenant. I didn't waste a moment after escaping. Shaking, breath ragged, I ran to the nearest neighbor's house and called the police. My voice trembled as I recounted everything: the tenant, the basement, the secret rooms, the diaries, the nightmare that had unfolded beneath my feet. Within an hour, flashing lights and urgent voices filled the quiet street. Officers entered the house cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the shadows that had long claimed the basement. They found the hidden room, Nathan's lair of horrors. The diaries, meticulously kept, revealed his chilling tactics: psychological manipulation, torture through isolation and mind games. The evidence was undeniable. Nathan was arrested without resistance. His calm, unreadable smile was gone, replaced by a cold, vacant stare. As the police led him away, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. The silence in the house was finally broken, but the scars remained, both on the walls and inside me. Days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to heal. I made plans to sell the house, to start fresh somewhere far from the shadows of the past. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear a whisper on the wind, a reminder that some silences never truly fade.